Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Mary Pettigrew. I am a part of the Empower Our Future communications team. And tonight we're pleased to be bringing you a conversation with PSCo, also known as Xcel, President Robert Kenney and longtime Xcel watchdog Leslie Glustrom. Let me go ahead and read the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge, with respect, as non-native people, that the land on which we stand, live, and learn is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. We also recognize the 48 contemporary tribal nations that are historically tied to the lands that make up the state of Colorado. We honor elders past, present, and future, and those who have stewarded this land throughout generations. We also recognize that our government, academic, and cultural institutions, and our nation itself were founded upon and continue to enact exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples. May this acknowledgement demonstrate a commitment to working to dismantle ongoing legacies of settler colonialism, oppression, and inequities, and to recognize the hundreds of Indigenous nations who continue to resist, live, create, and uphold their sacred relations across their lands. Let us seek to understand what it means to be in right relationship today with the traditional stewards of this land and with this land itself and with all creatures that inhabit it. And moving on, I'd like to introduce this evening's speakers. Chris Hoffman is a member of our Empower Our Future communications team, and he will be the facilitator this evening. Robert S. Kenney is president of Xcel Energy's Colorado operating company. He's responsible for the utility's overall operations. Mr. Kenney is joined by his colleague, Jack I. Lee, who is Regional Vice President for Planning and Policy, although our understanding is that he may or may not be jumping into the conversation. Leslie Glustrom is a retired biochemist and a longtime Xcel watchdog. Chris, let me hand it off to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. And once again, Empower Our Future is very grateful to Robert Kenney for making himself available for this community discussion. While it's likely that different points of view will be expressed, we want to ensure a mutually respectful dialogue. We as customers and Xcel as provider and all of us as citizens have an ongoing relationship. We'll start with some background. The information on the screen right now comes from Xcel Energy's information about their operation in Colorado, which is known as Public Service Company. We'd like to invite Robert and Leslie to comment on this information. We would like to ask each of the speakers to give some introductory remarks based on this information. And the first speaker is Robert, and please take it away with 2 minutes. Thank you.
Chris, thank you. Leslie, thanks for the invite. It is a pleasure to be in this Empower Our Future hour. So I'm watching the clock tick. So let me just start by saying, this is the basic overview of the Public Service Company of Colorado, or Xcel Energy Colorado. Just as a general proposition, Xcel Energy is in 8 states. We are a natural gas and electric provider in 8 states. Colorado is the largest of the operating companies and the only one that is a single state operating company. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this as I get to a slide later, but I'm very proud of the fact that between 2005 and 2030, you will see that our renewable mix grows substantially while the amount of natural gas and coal that we are burning decreases substantially. I note also on this slide, there's the basic information about the 1.6 million customers that we have that are electric customers and 1.5 million natural gas customers. I'm going to say a little bit about the ROE equity ratio and the credit rating, because I think it's important to recognize that just like your individual credit rating, Your credit rating determines the amount that you pay in interest for loans that you take out. Similarly, by having a very strong credit rating, we are able to issue debt and equity at the lowest possible cost. And so I'm glad that that's visually depicted. We have a very high credit rating, which means our ability to raise capital, whether through debt or equity, is lower than it otherwise would be. We are able to then pass along those savings to our customers. And it also makes our ability to invest in the clean energy transition cheaper than it otherwise would be. So the financial health of the utility is not something that's only important to our shareholders, but to our customers and our communities as well.
Thank you. Leslie, please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Robert, and thanks to everyone that's here. I've just taken a quick glance at the participant list, and I do want to spend part of my 2 minutes thanking so many people who have really made this transition on the electric side of Xcel's Colorado business really possible. And we couldn't have done it without people from all over really putting their shoulder to the wheels. So I'll say more about that in a minute, but I think I'll just kind of a lot of what Robert said is important. If we look in the upper left corner, we see both the electric and the gas statistics for Xcel in Colorado, Public Service Company Colorado. And I think the short version of the story tonight is that we've made great progress on the electric side. And I want to thank Xcel employees. We've got a few of them on the line, Jack being the top dog on the regulatory side. And it's a really big deal. They've made great progress. They've done things that they thought were impossible 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. And now they're doing it. And that's a really big deal. And I really am so grateful to the Xcel folks that have figured it out. They're doing what they thought was impossible, and they're doing it really well. The lights are staying on. The other side of the coin is the natural gas. We're at the beginning on natural gas, and it's not a very good story. So it's kind of this mixed message here tonight. As we come into the upper right corner, we see the financials. Robert's spoken a little bit about them, but the second line, $727 million of net income, that's after-tax net income. When I began, that was about $211 million. So we'll see more about that in a minute, but these are kind of numbers we kind of want to just be tied to kind of, this is Xcel's data. I didn't make this up. This comes from their financial reports. And then again, kind of looking at those circles at the bottom, you can see how the blue and the yellow have grown and are growing. And we're going to see more about this because it's actually a little better than this slide shows. So thank you again. Appreciate everybody being here and all your work.
Thank you very much. So this slide here also comes from Xcel Energy. The graph was prepared by Empower Future member Paul Cullen. The topic now has to do with electricity rates and profits. We'd like each presenter to comment on this information. And for this topic and the next several topics, each person will have 3 minutes for their remarks. And we'll start with Robert.
All right, 3 minutes, not 2. Great. I didn't get to say this at the beginning, and I think it's important because it'll place in context everything else I'm going to say. And I'm saying this quickly because I've only got 3 minutes. I joined the company in June of 2022. And just for the sake of the folks on the call that don't know who I am, I've had the privilege of spending time in both the public and the private sectors. So I served as an assistant attorney general in Missouri, as well as an attorney in private practice representing consumers in the state of Missouri and also representing businesses in commercial disputes. And then I got appointed to our State Public Utilities Commission in Missouri, and I served 6 years on the PUC, the last 2 as chairman of the commission. And then I had the opportunity to go to California, and I was at PG&E for 7 years, and now I'm here. I tell you all that to just give you some idea of my philosophy of public utility regulation and my philosophy of business. I do not find that there's an inherent conflict between doing well and doing good. And I will say the question and the title of this, if I were to revert back to my law practice days, it's a bit of a leading question. And I think, Leslie, you might be trying to engineer a particular answer with the question. Are our profits justified? I think the better way to ask the question is, what does Xcel Energy do with its profits? And so I think it's important to recognize that, yes, our profits have increased over time. And that previous slide pointed out what our net profits were. But understanding the nature of this business, it being a capital intensive business, for every dollar that we earn in profit, we put $3 approximately back into our customers and our communities in the form of investment. And we have to raise that capital by either issuing debt or issuing equity. And again, we're able to do that cheaply because we have and enjoy a very strong credit rating. But it is the balance sheet of the utility that has allowed us to be able to increase the amount of wind and solar. And it's the investments that we've made very early on when wind and solar technologies were nascent that have allowed that industry to prosper and has brought down the ultimate cost of deploying those renewables. And so I think the question as phrased isn't particularly meaningful, candidly, and it doesn't really answer and provide us much meaningful opportunity to engage in an understanding of what it means for an investor-owned utility to profit. I think you'll also note that 75–80% of the United States is served by investor-owned utilities that, by virtue of being investor-owned, are able to attract capital to be able to invest in new technologies. And we'll talk a little bit more, I think, later on about the clean energy plan that we just filed yesterday, how we're deploying that capital in service of the state of Colorado and in service of the environment. And it's because of the fact that capital is willing to come to us that we're able to make those investments.
Thank you very much. Leslie, please go ahead.
So much. Thanks, Robert. Appreciate that. And for those in the audience that are looking at this, you've probably figured it out, but the blue line is Xcel's sales in millions of kilowatt hours sold using the right-hand axis in the neighborhood of about 30,000 million kilowatt hours sold, more or less flat since we began this work about 20 years ago. The profits on the left-hand side are just for the electric sector. The 727 million includes the profits from the gas. And yes, you're darn right, it's a leading question. And I think it's it's the part of the conversation we'll want to have going forward. I guess I feel if these profits have been made in a competitive market with market forces at work and following the rules and all that. But I think the question is, could we do the energy transition, but not having had Xcel's profits from the electric sector more than tripling over the last 20 years while their sales are flat? I've been either a party to or very engaged in all of Xcel's rate cases. We've had, 8 major rate cases since I began. Well, if somebody wants to say afterwards, we can show you that. So their rate cases have led to over 800 million more a year in revenue from 2003. And having been very engaged in those rate cases, I guess I want to say that no, I understand Robert's argument, but it doesn't hold water when you drill down. And some significant part of those rate cases, as we go through the first decade, the aughts, a lot of those are being driven by putting the Pueblo Unit 3 coal plant into service. And that was, close to $1 billion investment, earning 6% weighted average cost of capital return on it. So in the neighborhood of let's call it $60 million a year for the first several years of profits from a coal plant that hasn't functioned well and never should have been built. Always excess capacity on top of a vigorous reserve margin. And we know that there are providers ready to provide electricity at a cost lower than Xcel. We can buy wind and solar for something well under 4 cents a kilowatt hour, a lot of it under 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And if you calculate your summer bill without all the taxes and everything, we're looking at about 15 cents a kilowatt hour that we're paying. And so I've watched all that go up. And frankly, I would love to show the slide of all the rate increases. But I think I'll just, except for to say that every community that's been able to go, including pretty much all of Xcel's wholesale customers, have been able to find alternate providers at a lower cost. So thank you.
Thank you very much. The information on the screen right now comes from Xcel Energy and from Xcel's filings with the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. This topic area is about the pace of transition to the clean energy economy. Xcel has been making progress, but is the pace fast enough? We'd like each presenter to comment on this information. And again, each person will have 3 minutes, and we'll start with Robert.
Well, let me go back to the previous slide and say, I think that the inference that one might draw, I think what Leslie's trying to imply is that our profits are not justified because of reasons that candidly were not 100% clear to me. And I think it's important to say that, again, inherently, I don't find the notion of profit to be inherently wrong. And I think it's important to focus on what we do with those profits. I'll say about this slide again, it's an interestingly worded and phrased leading question. Is our ongoing commitment to fossil fuels appropriate? I would say, just candidly, I reject the premise of the question, respectfully. We've demonstrated an ongoing commitment to decreasing our commitment to fossil fuels, and it's evidenced by the previous slide that we saw. It's also evidenced by the clean energy plan that we filed today that's going to actually result in a net decrease of something like 700 megawatts of natural gas. We will be retiring or allowing to expire about 1,300 megawatts of natural gas contracts. We are replacing it with about 600 megawatts of natural gas that'll be strategically located and that will very likely run less than 5% of the time. That is because we have a responsibility to ensure the reliability of the system and do it in a way that is affordable for our customers as well. And so even with the 600 megawatts of natural gas that we have proposed in our clean energy plan rather, we're still seeing a net decrease. And so I think we've got a demonstrable commitment to a decreased use of fossil fuels. Add to that the fact that we will retire all of our coal by the end of 2030. That is a significant commitment. And I say this coming from a state, Missouri, where 85% of our generation was coal-fired. When I left the state in 2015, it was still around 80% of our generation was coal-fired. We recognized very early on the need to retire our natural gas. I would also just make a comment about cost of service rate making. The decisions that we made at the time that we made them were supported not just by the company, but by the Public Utilities Commission. We can have a debate about the functioning of Pueblo Unit 3, but at the time that we made the decision to put that plant in service, it was supported by others, including the Public Utilities Commission. And with the passage of time, we're now committed to retiring that plant. So we will be completely out of coal by the end of 2030. And the last thing I'll say is that it's also important to note, and I think it's a statement of the company's values, that we're not just retiring these coal plants, but we're also retiring these plants with respect for the co-workers that work there and the communities that draw tax base by virtue of those assets being there.
Thank you. Leslie, 3 minutes, please.
Thanks, Robert. I always appreciate this is why we're doing this, so we can get all the perspectives out. So I do want to talk about Pueblo Unit 3, was intended to operate till 2070. Obviously, getting it retired with only a third of its life done at the end of 2030. So it'll have 20 years out of a 60-year life. Obviously, that's a step in the right direction, and I absolutely want to honor what Xcel has done and Mary, you might want to get my timer going, unless you want to give me some free time. I absolutely want to honor what what Xcel, the whole team has done, because as I say, when I began, they could not, the team that was there at Xcel at the time could not imagine operating a coal utility without burning coal. It was just absolutely impossible. And I must be a crazy woman from Mars was basically the message I was given over and over again. And now we have Xcel doing that. And this is really non-trivial. It's not quite as hard as changing the engine out on an airplane while you're flying it, but it's pretty close. You have to keep the lights on, you got to keep the grid up, and you've got to change out all your power sources. And this is non-trivial. And I absolutely honor what Xcel has done. At the same time, I think we have to be really clear about what goes on if we continue to operate Pueblo Unit 3 until 2030. About 2 million tons of CO2 a year. When it's operating at full rate, it's about 4 million tons, 4 to 5 million tons of CO2 a year. We'll be bringing that down to about 50% capacity factor over the next couple of years. It's important to recognize that every 1,000,000 tons of CO2 equates to, if you avoid that, it's like taking 200,000 cars off the road. You can check that on the EPA GHG calculator. There's no other thing we can do that would take 200,000 cars off the road. We can absolutely move away from Pueblo Unit 3 faster. We've got lots and lots of wind and solar and storage ready to go. We could be doing so much more on the demand side. And it's not just CO2. Coal is emitting many, many, many toxic substances, heavy metals. The air permit for Pueblo Unit 3 allows almost 2 pounds of mercury a week. And no one in their right mind would take 2 pounds of mercury, throw it into a very hot fire, and then spread it all over southeastern Colorado. Also using up millions of gallons of water a day, spending about $100 million a year to operate the coal plant and pay it off, which means we're going to pour hundreds of millions of dollars into this thing over the next 7 years, and then we're going to walk away from it. So let's just walk away. It's like an old car, but Xcel keeps it in their rate base, earns their profits off of it. I also want to really focus on the bottom part of the slide. I get that the part on the right is a bit of an eye chart, but where the red arrow is tells us that Xcel plans to spend $2,500 million, that's $2.5 billion on natural gas over the next 5 years. If you look at the very bottom line in the lower right corner, it's over $11 billion. Yeah, I mean, it's like somebody else having the credit card and then giving you the bills. And clearly, if you're spending $2.5 billion on natural gas, which we call methane, you're not as committed as you can and should be to the transition. So we're just chugging along, and we'll try to stay after 7 so we can expound more on these things. But thank you.
Thank you. The information on the screen right now also comes from Xcel Energy and from Xcel's filings with the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. This conversation about the potential for moving faster. We'd like each presenter to comment on this information, and each person will have 3 minutes. And again, we'll start with Robert.
All right, these are great questions, and I am really enjoying this discussion. And I will just, as an aside, say this is an example of how all of our civic conversation should occur. Let me just go back and just make a couple of points on COM3. We do have scrubbers and baghouses on the plant. It is controlling for sulfur, NOx, and mercury. And again, and I think it's important, the plant was expected to run to 2070. We will retire it by 2030. That is significant and consequential as far as I'm concerned. Are we taking full advantage of the potential for wind, solar, and storage resources? Our clean energy plan has more renewable and more storage relative to what we had expected to achieve in phase 1, and I'm very proud of that fact. We will very likely meet and likely exceed the state's and our own corporate goal of an 80% carbon reduction from 2005 levels by 2030. And we're doing this by adding 3,400 megawatts of new wind, almost 2,000 megawatts of solar, and nearly 1,200 megawatts of battery storage. And I think I talked a little bit about this before. The plan that we've submitted includes 2/3 of the natural gas that we had expected and intended in the modeling in phase 1. And so we're adding natural gas, but we're retiring more than we are adding. And so I would candidly assert that we are doing everything in our power to take advantage of wind, solar, and storage resources. And again, it's because of the investments that we made early on that those resources are as economical as they are now. But we're not stopping there. We're also testing new long duration storage resources like the Form battery project that is located in Pueblo. That is a project that will allow us to potentially, it's a 100-hour storage battery, allowing us to manage the system in a more dynamic way than ever before. This is an iron air technology that uses rusting and derusting. And we are actually investing in this technology now. And similarly to other technologies that are nascent, our early investment in that will bring these nascent technologies to maturation, allow them to be deployed more broadly. And it's because of our balance sheet and our financial strength that capital is willing to take bets on nascent technologies. So those are a couple of different arguments. I'm going to also add that we have proactively planned the system, and the Power Pathway project is an example of that fact. And so we are actively taking advantage of resources, and we're planning to be able to deploy those resources as evidenced by the Power Pathway.
Thank you. Leslie, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much. Excellent, Robert. And really, for those that are looking, if you need to squint, please do squint at those little circles at the bottom, because they're actually better than the little circles we showed you on the first slide. And again, Xcel just deserves a huge amount of credit. There are many issues that we're going to be fighting out over at the commission, but you can see the blue and the red they're already 51% in 2023. This is the year that we will go from a fossil fuel dominated electric system in Xcel territory to a renewable energy dominated system. Again, I was there when the Xcel people said, we can't put 30 megawatts of wind on our system, our 6,000 megawatt system, because we don't know when the wind's going to blow. So clearly this company has evolved in unbelievably important ways. I was there when the Xcel engineers first saw a solar panel run a meter backwards. They were just astounded. This is back in 06 and 07. So we've come a long ways, baby, so to speak. And we can see that as we head towards 2028, 56% wind, if I've got the right number here, 58% wind and 24% solar, so 81% renewable by 2028, still some coal and gas on the system, but this is a really big deal. And a lot of people on this webinar have worked, frankly, super hard. I'm here doing the talking, but all the people that you see on your screen, plus a whole lot of the participants have worked so hard for this. But again, if we keep operating that coal plant and we're putting out 1 to 2 million tons of CO2 a year, that CO2 stays in the atmosphere virtually forever, and we don't need to be doing that. We just don't need that coal plant. We can find ways to support Pueblo, and we can support the workers. We don't need to poison their community, can keep poisoning the Pueblo community. Yes, it's Xcel's profits, but they're going to have lots of replacement a generation. So we need to shut that coal plant down earlier. When it comes to gas, we need to really take a hard look. When the upper part is as a summary of the amazing bids that were received. And we know that the median capacity price for solar plus storage was less than the median capacity price. It was $9.69 for solar and storage and $10.65 for natural gas. And of course, natural gas will have fuel costs. Sadly, when we read that 120-day report that came out yesterday, Xcel is still discounting their future gas costs at what's called their weighted average cost of capital, something above 6%. If you didn't understand that, don't worry. It just means that they make their future natural gas costs look like they're going to be a really small fraction. And those of us that actually pay the bills know that actually the gas costs are a huge part of our bills. We don't pay discounted natural gas costs. Xcel models them discounted. So these are some of the things we'll discuss at the commission. We'll talk about ownership. We'll talk about demand side. We'll talk about shaping demand to match wind and solar better. There's many things left to do. But again, Xcel deserves a huge amount of credit for the distance they have come. And I honor that with the depth of my being.
Thank you. Now the question we'd like to address is what electric utility paradigm will best serve us in the 21st century? Again, each person will have 3 minutes, and we'll start with Robert.
Great, wonderful question. And I'm going to say a little bit about where I go back to where I started at the beginning. Having served on a public utilities commission, I do understand cost of service rate making. I understand the concept of a natural monopoly. It is most efficient in certain industries that are highly capital intensive and where the infrastructure itself is prolific, to have one entity doing that. And so I always think it's important not to call the utility a monopoly, but a natural monopoly, because a natural monopoly is an economic construct driven by market conditions. Highly capital intensive, and it's more efficient to have one entity stringing poles and wires. So I would say that the fundamentals are sound. We do have an opportunity, I think, through the use of creative rate design and other structures and mechanisms to be able to bring perhaps more equity to the pricing of our product. But I do believe that we have seen that the investor-owned utility model is able to spur innovation, bring nascent technologies into maturity. The public utility process at commissions around the country does provide the level of transparency, and it allows for strong advocates and watchdogs like Leslie to advocate for their positions. And so I would say that the bones and the foundation are strong. I welcome a discussion about ways in which we can improve the processes at the commission, and I think that's a fantastic conversation to have. I think we have 49 other states that have public utility commissions that have variations on the structurally sound public utility regulatory model. So I think there are opportunities to learn from what other states are doing. I think there are ways to bring greater transparency to our processes and to streamline them. And so I think that that's an absolutely good conversation to have. I will note a couple of different things very quickly, just from the last conversation, particularly around the Pueblo unit. Recognizing Leslie's comments, we have also committed that Pueblo will have limited operations as according to the initial CEP settlement. So beginning in 2025, we will reduce the output of that, 60% of max capacity in 2025, and then decreasing down to 33% in 2029 in advance of full retirement at the end of 2030. And so it's important to note that we recognize the need to accelerate the retirement of that plant for all the reasons that Leslie cited. We also have a responsibility to maintain the reliability and the affordability of the system simultaneously. And it's not easy to live in the ands of providing safe and reliable and affordable and increasingly green electricity. And the pace at which we're doing it, I would put up against any other utility in the United States any day of the week.
Them's his fighting words.
Which part?
You'll put yourself up against any other utility because we've got some utilities on this call who are ahead of you. So I'll let them fight those fights with you. But thank you so much. And this kind of goes to the core of things. Since Robert keeps going back to Pueblo Unit 3, which is where I like to go also, I do want to point out that the thing is not reliable. It's never been reliable. It kicks off at a regular rate and it costs a lot of money. The settlement agreement that said it would be retired at the end of 2030 was based on the resource plan, page 181 and AKJ 2, revision 2, and 21A, 141E for those PUC folks that are listening, based on a $5.5 million a year of capital, which in itself is questionable. But Xcel has told the commission they're not going to spend $5.5 million this year and next year. They're going to spend $17 million in order to keep that quote unquote reliable plant going. Yes, it has mercury controls, but the 2 pounds of mercury, almost 2 pounds of mercury a week is after the mercury controls. And there's arsenic and chromium and lead. Robert's a guy with a lot of integrity. He would never take mercury and sprinkle it on his neighbors' Cheerios, their kids' Cheerios. But that's what we're doing in Pueblo. And we need to stop. We just need to stop. We need to get on with it. We need to move beyond coal sooner rather than later. That CO2 will stay in the atmosphere for a very long time. So with respect to structures, I think it's probably no secret that I think there's two big parts that we need to be thinking about. And there may be some folks on the call that think I'm crazy again, but hey, I've been called crazy a lot and then I've been vindicated. I've lived long enough to be vindicated many times here. So the first one, of course, is competition. Yes, a natural monopoly over transmission and distribution, not a natural monopoly over generation. So we know that every state that's allowed some competition, we can look to California. There are many other states, Marin County, north of San Francisco did it. Everybody kind of watched and thought, can they do better than PG&E? And as they watched that happen, we now have I think it's something in the neighborhood of 40% of what used to be PG&E load served by community choice aggregators. They choose their electric provider, gives them more control over their source. The second, so competition, I think, is an important thing. This is not you don't have a natural monopoly over generation, and you and I will fight about that for a long time. The other thing that I think is so important to think about, and one of the reasons this picture is here, everybody's big on transmission. Xcel is spending $2 billion on transmission on the Eastern Plains, but virtually every time I open my computer in the morning, there's another picture of a storm that's taken out the wires. And, we've got hundreds of thousands of people. I happen to have roots in Eastern Canada, and the people I know are without their, after Hurricane Lee went up there. So I think we need to be thinking much more about a very different system that has a much better balance between the big grid and the smaller solutions like microgrids, virtual power plants, and bringing a very different paradigm to bear on this issue.
So before we go on to questions from the community, we will give each presenter an opportunity to give a brief summary, and you each have 1 minute, and Robert goes first.
So I got a lot to respond to. That picture, it's important, on the previous slide, was not one of our transmission towers, in case you couldn't read the small print. So that's good. Leslie talked about community choice aggregation in California. I was there. It is first and foremost important to ask yourself, for what problem are you solving? It is not actually definitive that CCAs were providing their power cheaper. And it's also not clear that they were greener, because they were deploying a lot of RECs rather than building new resources in the state. This slide is important to note because it really hits home the fact that we led the nation by announcing our bold clean energy strategy with tangible and aggressive goals. We've since executed on that vision through our 2017 Clean Energy Plan, which retired Pueblo 1 and 2 while bringing on significant amounts of renewables. We're continuing that. We're literally doubling down on that commitment in the Clean Energy Plan that we filed yesterday, which will retire all of our coal plants by the end of 2030 and doubling the amount of energy served by renewables, while investing heavily in battery storage to reduce our reliance on natural gas while maintaining exceptional reliability. I'm excited about the opportunity to answer questions.
Thank you. Leslie, please go ahead for 1 minute.
Thanks. And I think there's another slide that'll come up. But again, I want to thank Empower Our Future for putting this on. We've got people from all over. I also want to acknowledge the folks from the Public Utilities Commission who are here, who work their off because it's just one darn thing after another. So thank you. So yeah, these are the things we argue about in detail at the commission. I super appreciate Robert doing this in a public kind of way and with support from Jack and his whole team. But I will say that I think the price of the transition is too high. When we're paying in summer 15 cents a kilowatt hour, something probably in the neighborhood of 12 in the winter for a product that costs, something under 4 cents to produce. Okay, we got a return on equity of above 9% for Xcel. That implies some risk. But when they have all these coal plants that they retire, they expect us to pay for the stranded assets. And then, of course, the picture of the planet. We got to take this really seriously, folks. And I think there'll be some questions from the audience, but this is really real if we want to leave a livable climate for our kids. So we got to put that as first priority.
Thank you. And as you know, Empower Future has solicited questions from the community via our website. We have received a lot of questions. When several questions had to do with the same topic area, we've consolidated those into a single question. And for those people who are interested, Leslie and Robert too can stay online after the official close for a little bit to answer further questions and supply additional documentation. If Robert is unable to stay online after the end of, if there are questions that we don't get to before Robert and Leslie have to leave, we will make sure that Robert and Leslie both receive copies of all of the questions. We've received a lot of questions. In the interest of time, the question may be for Robert or Leslie or both. If one person answers, we'll offer the other person the opportunity to comment. And if you could not strict limit, but kind of aim for about 1.5 minutes for answer to question, that would be helpful. Understand some of these are complex questions, so we can be flexible, but we also do have a lot of questions. So the first question is for Robert, and the question is Xcel serious about including nuclear in the 2025 solicitation for replacement resources for the Pueblo Unit 3 coal plant? Either way, when will the many people in Pueblo who are opposed to bringing nuclear to their community be given a chance to participate fully, not in a marginal way, to the current process. Robert?
So I'm going to take the second part first about participating in a meaningful way as opposed to a marginal way. I'm not really sure how that question was derived. We have a advisory group that comprises members of the Pueblo community that are actively participating in the process of examining what resources we will use to replace the retirement of Pueblo 3. So I will say we have a process in place that is taking and soliciting input from the community. It's a formal process. We're studying all resources. With respect specifically to nuclear technology, we have a nuclear fleet that we run in Minneapolis in our other operating company. So we have the technical expertise. It is not a technology that we're taking off the table. As a practical matter, however, seeing a new 1100 megawatt nuclear generating unit built in the United States is unlikely because of the cost and expense and time. There are advanced nuclear technology and small modular reactors is a variety of new technologies that are still nascent that we think hold promise. It's unlikely that such technologies will be mature enough on the timeline that's required to replace Comanche 3, but it's absolutely a technology that we will continue to explore.
Thank you. Leslie, and thanks for keeping it to a short period of time too. Appreciate that. Leslie, do you have comments about that?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, Xcel does have a advisory committee in Pueblo, but whether they meant to or not, they've sort of shut out many of the citizens who expressed really strong concern about nuclear. And I'm going to name names. I mean, Robert, I would like to see you sit down with Jamie Valdez and with Velma Campbell and Tom Corlett, and really listen to them and figure out what they want in order to be included, because this state has dumped on Pueblo for decades. You didn't put the coal plant in Boulder because you knew we'd freak out. And I know you weren't there, Robert, when that decision was made, but you put it in Pueblo. They don't get the electricity. They get the pollution. We get the electricity, keeping all these computers we're all working on now coming out of when the plant is up. So let's change that around and let's make sure that the people who live in Pueblo are fully engaged. And the names I gave you, and I'm happy to repeat those: Jamie Valdez, Tom Corlett, Velma Campbell, and the team they work with. Be grateful if you could sit down with them. Nuclear, small modular, we're looking at 9 cents a kilowatt hour and above, and we can get wind, solar, and storage for well under 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So, and we don't want inflexible resources, which what nuclear tends to be. And respectfully, the nuclear fleet in Minnesota has had more than a few issues. So I would be great if we could just take it off the table so those poor folks in Pueblo don't have to feel like they're going to get dumped on again. It's just time to treat them better. So
thank you. Thank you. And thanks again also, Leslie, for keeping it to the time so we can get to these other questions. Next question, again for Robert. Xcel's Colorado Clean Heat Plan appears to many as a plan for continuing Xcel's natural gas business well into the future. Is that Xcel's intention? Robert, please go ahead.
Well, our intention is to reduce carbon emissions from the LDC in a way that is meaningful, complies with the statute, and does it in a way that recognizes the limitations of current technology, and also does it in a way that's affordable. I will just say this, and with all humility, I think we submitted a plan that balances all of those. And you candidly have the architect and godfather of the Clean Heat Plan on the phone with you right now, Jack Eiley. And so I will commend Jack and the team for putting forth a plan that reduces carbon emissions from the LDC through a variety of different methods and methodologies, including CNG, including methane leak detection. We are actually deploying some all-electric pilots as a part of our Clean Heat Plan. And then we're also maintaining the infrastructure in that system to be able to use cleaner molecules. And so you'll note that we're also deploying a hydrogen blending pilot as well. And so I think what we've put forward again, demonstrates a commitment to using less fossil fuel, and what fossil fuel we're using it in a more efficient and less emitting way. And so I don't know that I accept the premise of the question, but appreciate the interest.
Thank you very much. Leslie, what concerns are you hearing about Xcel's clean heat plan and the effort to reduce our reliance on natural gas?
I'm hearing an earful, and I'm hoping that Xcel will take their customers seriously, because it reminds so many of us what happened with coal, which is like, you know, pat us on the head and tell us to go home. If we actually want the lights on and want to watch TV at night, then they better burn coal. And so then meaning Xcel spent, you know, $1.5 billion on coal plants, close to $1 billion on Pueblo Unit 3, and several hundred million on what was called the Clean Air, Clean Jobs retrofits for the coal plants in Brush and Hayden. We objected, hundreds of people objected. They're like, oh no. So they kind of spent the money first. Now we have stranded assets because they realized, oh, you know what, those actually aren't what we want. So this whole $2.5 billion on natural gas, yes, the clean heat plan calls for a reduction, a very small reduction in gas burn. And it's just absolutely disconcerting that Xcel's regional, I think he's regional vice, I can't remember, regional vice president Jeff Ling, who many of us know since he was a college kid, give him a big title, big salary, and make him into a merchant of doubt about heat pumps, whether we talk about Maine or northern Minnesota or Norway, or, we know heat pumps can function well in cold weather. Xcel tested the Bosch heat pump. It's like testing a not very good heat pump and then saying it doesn't work very well. Well, we know it doesn't work very well. You got to test the good ones. And of course, you lose some performance at high altitude. I mean, everything, gas turbines, air jets, everything. So yeah, there's a lot, and I'm hoping Xcel will listen carefully and not do what we did on coal, which is spend a lot of money first, privatize the profits, socialize the risk, and put all the stranded assets onto their customers. So hoping we can have a different dance around methane.
Thank you. On to the next question, again for Robert. We know that the extreme droughts, floods, and fires we've been having in Colorado are being driven by the burning of fossil fuels. Back in 2021, the International Energy Agency said, quote, "If governments are serious about the climate crisis, there can be no new investments in oil, gas, and coal from this year." That was in 2021. Yet Public Service Company plans to invest $510 million in new natural gas infrastructure in 2023 and a total of $2.5 billion by 2027. So what part of no new investment in gas does Public Service not understand?
Yeah, I love the turn of the phrase. So let me say a couple things. We've also read the IPCC's admonition that we have to maintain climate or global temperature rise at 1.5 degrees. We believe our plans do allow that. We are maintaining some aspects of the natural gas system while preparing it to be able to burn cleaner molecules. We are slowly retiring and decreasing, and I shouldn't even say slowly, we're actually pretty aggressively retiring and decreasing the amount of natural gas upon which we rely. And we are continuing to make investments in longer term battery storage. We're making tremendous investments in wind and solar. And so I think that the investments that you are seeing result in a net decrease in the overall gas that we will be burning. And so our plans are consistent with the IPCC's research and admonition that we maintain global temperature rise at 1.5 degrees Celsius. So I'm gonna stop with 19 seconds left. So
okay, thank you, Leslie. Do you have a comment on this?
I do know that Xcel has had their electric plans tested for the 1.5 degrees C, but I have not seen it for gas. Maybe it's in there and I just haven't seen it. My memory is the clean heat plan, the one being proposed by Xcel, calls for the amount of gas compared to status quo to be 87% of status quo. 2.5 billion on natural gas. clean molecules, we're talking about hydrogen. I don't know what Xcel thinks their top percentage is, but it's usually 20 to 30% because it's such a darn leaky molecule. That's why NASA always has to call off the launches, because even the best engineers, the NASA engineers, can't keep hydrogen from leaking. And we know, Boulder, we got all these rental units from the students and they leaking, and we hear from those folks, and you can hear from those folks if you read the comments on your website. So, and even if you did, let's call it a 30% hydrogen, you're still going to be 70% methane. We know methane leaks also. We know methane on a per ton basis on a 20-year time frame, which is the one that matters for methane, 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So respectfully to Jack, who I have a huge amount of respect for his work, but the Clean Heat Plan does not cut it in any way, shape, or form. And even if you do 30% hydrogen, the carbon reduction for that, you take it, divide it in half and subtract a bit. My memory is about, that's a 12% carbon reduction. A 20% hydrogen blend would be 8%, and 10% is 3%. So this is not a large carbon reduction. Hydrogen's explosive. I could go on and on and on. We are appalled, respectfully to Jack and his team, with the Clean Heat Plan. Ask me how I really feel.
Thank you.
I almost feel like we're in a debate where if your name is uttered, you should be provided an opportunity to respond. I feel like Jack should get a chance to say something.
Yeah, that was, I think your feelings are fairly clear, Leslie, and they usually are. I hear you. The spirit of the Clean Heat Plan was to bring as many solutions forward as we could, because I think your comments assume that we can do this all with electrification. And frankly, we're not here to say that we can't at this point, but we're so early in the cycle on this problem that we are concerned that the levels of implementation that are needed to do the levels of emissions reductions we would all like to see are possibly not doable. And to illustrate that, we think that we would have to be doing heat pumps at roughly 4 times the rate that we're doing photovoltaics on rooftops today in Colorado. And we're just skeptical that we can drive the level of rebates and drive the level of market transformation required. That said, we propose 200,000 electrification actions, not even counting heat pumps in the Clean Heat Plan. Every single portfolio we brought forward, every single one,
So,
had electrification as the #1 action and the #1 expenditure in our budget. So we're absolutely going to try on your preferred pathway, and we may have to respectfully disagree on the one that you don't prefer for now.
We've never disagreed, Jack. Thank you. Appreciate that.
So we're just at time that we have a lot more questions, and we can continue to pursue these in the Empower Hour after hours, which is going to take place after a quick summary, 1 minute each from Robert and then from Leslie.
Well, there are lots of thoughtful questions in the chat. I can't respond to them all. What I would like to leave you with is, please know, by virtue of the fact that I'm here, that I am committed to engaging in healthy and spirited discussion. I do subscribe to the perspective that steel sharpens steel, and so it's a good marketplace of ideas makes all of our ideas better. And so I am a big believer in being transparent, being humble, being empathetic. I do believe that I work for a company that expresses those values by participating in the PUC process, by being willing to listen to the reflections and perspectives of others, and putting ourselves in the shoes of our customers. And that is why we are accelerating the retirement of our fossil plants. We are taking into account specifically how those particular communities have been affected and will be affected by the retirement of those assets. And that is part of the thing that I'm most proud of about the company, is that we're leading the clean energy transition and doing it in a way that demonstrates respect and care for the communities that we serve. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'll be here for a bit longer after.
Thank you, Robert. Leslie, please go ahead for a minute.
Thanks. And yeah, again, Xcel has made so much progress, and that progress, we believe, has come from that steel sharpening steel process. Robert wasn't here when Boulder said, if you're going to keep burning coal, we're going to divorce you because we can't seem to get your attention any other way. And we spent 10 years fighting over the municipalization issue. But finally in 2018, Ben Folk said, we've heard you. And I really want to credit the folks in Denver. We've got some of them on the phone. They also, because it's one thing for Boulder to say it, whatever, it's just Boulder. When Denver says, listen, we're not okay with your trajectory, and Ben Folk, to his credit, heard it. I give him so much credit, the former CEO. So we're going to do that again on natural gas. I'm just really hoping we can speed up that process. Time is short. I don't have to tell you, code red is the short version of time is short. So let's not mess around. As hard as it's going to be, Jack, the thing that is impossible is to recreate a planet with a livable climate for human beings. The rest of the 10, 20 million years, other stuff will be here. But it's hard to do clean heat. It's impossible to do a livable planet for humans. As a mother and a grandmother, I will fight like crazy.
Thank you very much. We're very close to time here, so I just want to thank Robert Kenney again for making yourself available to us and to the community. I'm going to turn it over to Mary.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you so much to our speakers. Really appreciate Robert Kenney being here, Leslie Glustrom, and Jack Eiley. Our speakers have agreed to stay on. So we do have a little changing of the guard. Chris Hoffman, thank you again for leading the conversation this evening. The facilitation will now be taken over by Steve Whitaker. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Robert and Leslie, for staying on for a few more questions. Let me begin with the next. These are ones that we have received on our website and are going with those at this time. Given that Xcel is required to cut emissions from its gas business 22% by 2030, these new gas assets will likely become stranded before the end of their lifetimes. Who is Xcel going to ask to pay for these stranded assets?
Well, I don't know that they will become stranded. So I think I just got to start with maybe the premise of the question not being fully accurate. Because one of the things I will say is, as we think about hydrogen and other cleaner molecules flowing through those assets, we'll continue to use them. So I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the question.
Leslie, do you have any comment on that question?
No comment. I'm just kidding you, Steve. Of course I have comment. Yeah. I mean, they told us the coal wouldn't be stranded, right? Oh, we're going to spend $1 billion on a coal plant, operate till 2070. No, we haven't analyzed our coal supplies, and yes, we'll make it work and it'll be perfect. And if you want your lights on, do that. And now we're going to spend over $300 million on retrofits for the coal plant in Brush, the one they call Pawnee, and the coal plants in Hayden. No, those won't become stranded. Well, we're less than 10 years into that $300 million that was spent on the Brush and Hayden coal plants. And it's all stranded, and Xcel's asked that their customers pay it off. We're making some progress, but their original requests are to pay it off plus their full level of profits, return at what's called the WACC, weighted average cost of capital. So Robert can kind of shrug his shoulders and say, no, they won't become. And this hydrogen thing, I might ask Robert, what do you think is the highest percentage hydrogen you can put into your gas pipelines?
So
what are you aiming for?
Well, I think that's what we want to learn through some of the demonstration projects. I think the research tells us that, it depends. We don't know yet. And I think that's why we're starting with the demonstration projects. What's the percentage in the demonstration project that we're looking at, Jack? Is it 4 or 5%?
It goes up from 2% to 5% to 10%, I think, over a 2-year period.
Yeah. But again, I will say a couple of things. I mean, I think and I don't say this with being Pollyanna or being overly optimistic, but I do, and I don't mean this as a platitude. I believe in human ingenuity. I believe that we devise solutions to difficult problems, and I believe that there are technologies that are nascent that will mature. So that's, maybe I'll just stop there and save time for the next question.
Great.
I want to respond because, yeah, you know, we're an innovative, species, but hydrogen is hydrogen. It's wicked leaky, and it's explosive. And the chances you can go much above 30%, the pipes get brittle and they break and all that sort of thing. Ask GE, they know that. They've written, I don't have the report in front of me, but it's all there in their report. And so this whole concept that somehow you can keep all those pipelines going, leaking methane and hydrogen, and they won't become stranded, and that this is the right thing to do for the next generation is, hear me. This ain't gonna fly. So let's face that now. Let's not do what we did on coal, which is to spend $1.5 billion on this state before we realize, oh, those hundreds of customers that told us this wasn't the right solution. Turns out they were right and our engineers were wrong. So let's not do that on the gas transition. We'll fight it out at the commission, but I am begging of you to take off your rose-colored glasses and get real serious, because your ability to keep passing stranded assets onto your customers, there's a very short leash on that. So both for the planet and for your long-term financial health, let's get real. Let's not be Pollyannish. And, Robert, I don't think of you as Pollyannish, but on the gas issue, it's looking an awful lot like that to those of us that do know a fair bit about this stuff, actually. And I have a dozen engineers behind me that like, oh yeah, I tried to deal with hydrogen and I couldn't do it. You can read the GE reports, on and on and on.
Thank you, Leslie. Mary, can you reestablish the timer just to pace us as we go through these? So the next question, we'll begin with Robert. Allowing more competition and consumer choice by authorizing community choice energy in Colorado would likely drive lower costs, faster decarbonization, and more innovation. Since wholesale power production has been a thriving competitive enterprise for decades, what is the argument to continue providing monopoly protection to IOUs rather than requiring IOUs to compete for wholesale customers like most other businesses?
So, gosh, these questions actually presuppose answers. So I will say a couple of things. I'm looking at one of the questions in the chat asks a similar question about poles and wires being a natural monopoly and gen not being. And I will respond to that by saying, if you look at our last RFP and you look at our most recent ERP filing, it's fully competitive. I mean, we issue RFPs and it is very competitive. And so I think you'll see that that's in action. So we are competing. This notion, however, about CCAs automatically being more cost competitive is simply not borne out by the record. And I saw somebody in the chat was talking about the CCAs in California and how their statewide renewable energy is 33% and the CCA average is 63%. They buy RECs, and that's demonstrably provable. They bought RECs from PSCo. And so, this notion that by virtue of the fact that they are CCA, that they're somehow more competitive and greener is just simply not borne out by the facts. And I'll say, at the end of the day, you still have to have a provider of last resort, and it ends up being the regulated utility model. So, there's a reason. And last thing I'll say is, in my last 10 seconds, and I may get a chance to say this again, I don't believe. Actually, I'm going to pause and wait because I need more than 2 seconds.
Oh, go ahead. I think,
I'm going to wait. I'll have another opportunity. I'm confident that it'll still be relevant.
Okay, Leslie.
It's after hours.
A minute and a half for your comment.
And I'm not following through. I feel like in after hours, I don't think maybe we are recording, but I thought we weren't. So yeah, I guess the bottom line is, to my mind, Xcel is welcome to compete, but they're not welcome to monopolize on the generation side. We've had communities ranging from Fountain, which is hardly a bastion of liberal thinking or climate concern, go to market and say, wow, we thought we had a good deal with Xcel, but look we've got a much better deal. To communities like Steamboat Springs, Yampa Valley Electric, and Grand Valley, the area around Grand Junction, have all just recently gone shopping and found better deals. And I would like to say, if anybody wants to follow this, I think the best way to follow it is to subscribe to Alan Best's online journal. It's for free, but give him some money if you can. Alan Best, Big Pivots. And you'll be able to kind of, because Alan is just a tireless reporter and gets the great interviews. And so you can throw shade all you want, Robert, but we wouldn't have all those communities in California, basically the entire coast of California, moving to the CCA model if it didn't have benefits. Is it perfect? No system is perfect, but it certainly has benefits. Community after community after community has gone down that route. Are there some failures and problems? Absolutely. But just look at what's going on. Thank you.
Okay, moving to our next question for Robert. The Colorado Electric Vehicle Plan calls for 940,000 EVs by 2030. Customers are interested in knowing the best times to charge their vehicles to maximize the use of cheap renewable energy. Xcel currently is employing time of use rates that encourage charging EVs at night. Engineers, including Xcel's own, have seen that this practice results in using more fossil fuel to charge EVs when the wind is not blowing at night and wasting or curtailing electricity from solar during the day. The ideal information for customers would be both real-time percentages of renewables currently on the system and a day-ahead forecast of the percentages of renewables on the system. Smart chargers could take advantage of these to maximize both savings for customers and the utilization of clean energy, and also help avoid curtailment of clean energy. Xcel currently has this information, but is not publicly available. Southwest Power Pool currently displays their percentage of renewables through a slight time lag on their website. How soon can Xcel make this useful real-time percentage of renewable information available to customers?
All right, I think we got a separate meeting set up. I wonder who asked the question, Leslie. We have a separate meeting to talk about time of renewables.
Yeah, it wasn't me. I
know it wasn't, but that was a long preamble, and I am hard pressed to figure out how to answer it. Listen, I think there is an opportunity for us to talk about how to use rate design to send price signals of all sorts to different types of users. I think there's an opportunity to use bidirectional charging of electric vehicles as a grid asset. I think these are all great questions. Very challenging for me to answer that specific question in this form in this short time. But I don't have any preconceived notion for or against making more information available. I will say a couple of things though. I mean, the average consumer, and our research bears this out, is not necessarily equipped to use the information that you're asking for. And there also are commercial sensitivities that are present. Southwest Power Pool and what they make available, I can't comment on that specifically, but I think it's a conversation that we're willing to have, and I know that we set up a separate time to have that discussion with a smaller subgroup here. I'm going to go back to something else Leslie said with my 13 seconds. No shade, not throwing any shade. And we absolutely have said that our competitive process for generation is one that's very transparent and yielded competitive results. Okay, ran out of time.
Leslie,
Okay.
your comments?
Yeah, of course. Working backwards or forwards or something. With respect to Xcel's RFP being very competitive, that's true. But then there's a middleman between the wind and solar providers that are willing to get ready to bring us wind and solar at something well under 4 cents a kilowatt hour, and then Xcel, what they charge us. And what we're looking for is to provide some competition in that space, because otherwise, you know, you can buy it for 3 or 4 and sell it to us for 12 or 15, and that's what's not competitive. So that's one of the big things. With respect to this long question, which I think I know who wrote it, and that person is very smart and very paying attention. So thank you. I refer to this concept as time of renewables. Credit Ken Regelson with kind of coming up with that concept. And then there's other ways to do it. Yeah, no, the average consumer is not going to sit and, you know, monitor their computer screen, but you put it all into black boxes and you preset them. When I come home, I don't have to do what I call dumb charging. I have a little black box. I've told it I need this much by tomorrow. If the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, do it then, but don't just charge any old time. And I really want to credit Robert again. Once he realized that we have been asking for a meeting about this, what we call time of renewables. It's got other names too, but he got on it. And I think we're going to have a meeting. But I will say that Ron Sinton, who has done a lot of the analysis on this, started asking for a meeting in 2018. Steve Whitaker, who's moderating tonight, I think has asked for a meeting at least 15 or 20 times. Robert has responded. I am looking forward to moving this forward and problem solving together. It's a very fresh, a new leaf is being turned over, and that's great news. So thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Our next question concerns conflict of interest. Financial documents show Xcel owns more than 26,000 natural gas transmission and distribution lines in Colorado alone. Last year, the system generated nearly $2 billion in revenue for the company, helping generate a record $1.7 billion in profit for shareholders. Also, in February 2023, Colorado Public Radio reported that while Xcel Energy has put solar and wind at the center of its electricity plans, it also is a prominent force behind Coloradans for Energy Access, a nonprofit dedicated to fighting a growing movement to shift buildings from natural gas heat to renewable electricity. What is Xcel going to address the conflict of interest between the electricity and the natural gas sides of the company?
I don't start the clock yet. I'm just reflecting on the question. I don't think there is a conflict of interest. And again, something I didn't get to say that I want to say that I think is important, because some of the questions, not all, but some of the questions tend to indicate a presumption of nefarious motive by the people that work at Xcel. And I want to summarily reject what I think is implicit in some of the questions. People that work in this industry, I have found, have the heart of a public servant. The human beings that I work with do this work because they believe in providing an essential service to their fellow man and woman. So I want to just say that the people that work in this industry are good people that get up every day wanting to do the right thing. So that's first and foremost. Coloradans for Energy Access and other advocacy groups that we support are a reflection of a diverse customer base. We serve 1.6 million electric customers and 1.5 million gas customers. I understand that that may not be universally understood, but there are segments of our society that still want to use natural gas for either cooking or for home heating. And we represent all of those customers. So from Boulder to the Western Slope, we represent a very diverse customer base. And I think some of the numbers you cited are actually across all 8 states, the $1.7 billion in profits. So you look at North Dakota, South Dakota, Michigan, Wisconsin, Texas, New Mexico, and Minneapolis and Minnesota and Colorado. So we have a very, very diverse customer base, and we represent the interests of all of those customers. And we've done research that tells us that there are customers that still want to use natural gas. And so some of the customers some of the interests on whose behalf we advocate are those that still want to use natural gas for cooking and home heating.
Leslie, your comment.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously complex. And I do want to, I've tried to say it a few different ways. I'll say it again. The folks who work for Xcel are really good folks. They work really hard. You hire really competent people. They work hard. They care. They're trying to get this job done. And they've mostly gotten it done on the electric side, and it was considered impossible not very long ago. So I really want to honor that. I also, just as with a parent, your kid's great and doing great things and this and that, but you kind of see them trying to pull one over on you. And as a parent, your job is to call them out on it. So on behalf of all of your customers, I also want to call you out on some things. There's the Coloradans for Energy Access. Most recently, there's Jeff Ling's interview with the Gazette, which definitely threw shade on heat pumps. And there's, the article just came out in Jewel just in the last week. Heat pumps work just fine at cold temperatures. They have a very good coefficient of performance. But if you test a Bosch, which is not a very good heat pump, just look at its specs, look how fast they fall off at lower temperatures. Well, you're going to get, frankly, bad results. But it's like, excuse me, don't test a Bosch, test the good ones, test Mitsubishi. And then don't go to the media with half-baked a non-truce or whatever.
But is that legitimate disagreement for reasonable minds to differ? Or is that us, I think the phrase you use, trying to pull one over on somebody? Because I don't think we're trying to pull the wool on anybody. There's research on both sides of the equation. I think we can have room for reasonable minds to disagree, and we can have this discussion without attributing nefarious motives to people. I don't think that Jeff was trying to pull anything over on anybody. I know for a fact he wasn't.
Well, whether it's nefarious motives or whether it's corporate spin, and I think this is the problem you inherited, Robert, which is that we have very little trust for this company because we've had so much corporate spin. We look at the red logo, the people are good, but your job is to defend the monopoly, and you will spin whatever you need, just like that red logo. And Jeff was definitely, most people don't know that the Bosch isn't a very good heat pump, but that's what you did. So, if you want to regain our trust, you have to come from a much higher place than the company has come from. And when trust has been damaged, which it has been, by how long it took us to get the company turned around on coal, then if you want to regain our trust, you got to be squeaky clean, honest, integrity. I think you have all of those characteristics, Robert, but it's going to be a decision. Are you going to work to regain your customers' trust, or are you going to continue what we look at as corporate spin? And if you want to know the difference, feel free to call me. I'll be happy to give you.
I would love to have that conversation, because I do believe that we work every day. I think I am a person of high integrity. I think everybody I work with are people of high integrity. I do believe we have genuine and legitimate, honest disagreements, and that's important. I don't believe that it's purely corporate spin. And I hope I'm not hearing you say, Leslie, I don't think this is what you intend, but that the only way for us to re-earn trust is to fully agree with everything that you tell us. I don't think that's what I hear you saying. I hope that's not.
Absolutely not. But
yes. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Okay.
But I apologize, Steve. But if you're wondering whether what you or Jeff Ling or Jack or anybody's going to do, how it's going to be accepted by your customers, it doesn't have to be me. All the people that have asked you these questions would be happy to help you see how we're perceiving it.
And again, that's why I'm here, as a sign of my willingness to listen and learn, but to also share our perspective. And I hope that there is a takeaway that, by virtue of me being willing and Jack being willing to step into the ring, we are
absolutely
we are human beings of integrity, and I have no desire to pull one over on anybody. And when I hear those types of inflammatory words, it does require me to respond.
Yeah. The Denver Gazette interview really undermined trust. And we'll disagree about the clean heat plan things, and we'll keep moving forward. But don't really, it's not nefarious motives. It's just, and I could tell you all the times I've heard Xcel witnesses lie on the stand at the commission, and so it's that.
See, when you
No, you
say
don't have
that,
to
that's
agree all
really
the time.
disappointing.
Yeah,
Let's,
well, it was been a sad story, believe me. So, you don't have to agree on everything, but
I meant to say it's
Standard has
disappointing,
to
not that, it's not disappointing that somebody lied on the stand. It's disappointing that you characterized it that way, because I'm inclined to not believe that somebody lied under oath on the stand.
I'm glad you're inclined, but I'll be happy to
as
walk you through it.
facilitator, let me move the conversation along.
And thank you so much to our speakers. Really appreciate Robert Kenney being here, Leslie Glustrom, and Jack Eiley.